One of the things that becomes obvious when you come up to the Burrup, and particularly out on the Burrup Peninsula where our port is located, is that you have to have a strong awareness of the environment and a strong awareness of the history and heritage that resides on the Burrup. But at the same time, it's also an industrial area where there's a nationally significant port operation exporting very important products to the world. So it's that balance. Dampier's had an interesting history as it was established as a port by Hammersley Iron back in the 60s. It was a privately run port. It was only when the North West Shelf Venture actually determined where they would put their LNG gas plants off the North West Shelf that they determined that Dampier would be the best location. It's a sheltered harbour, 42 island archipelago off the coast, and they would put it there. And that was 25 years ago. The establishment of a port authority meant that the port authority had its own board, and then it had a very small cadre staff. So when the port first actually started, it had 10 people working for it, and slipped down to as low as 5 people during that first 15-year history. But its main function at that point was just to oversee the marine safety, and the port ran accordingly, manned the control tower as we do today, and then had a small admin function. Where it came of age was really in 2003, which for me was when I started at the port, but it was more coincidence than timing. It was really 2003 that the China demand for iron ore took off, the South Korean demand for LNG and into Japan had already been going. So the port was just going into a period where it had to grow. The first 3 years of my tenure here was just all construction. We had $3 billion worth of construction going on at Rio Tinto. We had $80 million of our own construction going on. It was a time of heightened activity. Not so much worrying about what's happening outside the port, because we were all just looking at increasing the facilities in the port to be able to cope with future trade. And then 2007 we were actually awarded the Australian Port of the Year. And we got that award for customer service. Coincidentally, the previous year in 2006, we'd won the State Premier's Award for customer service for port security. So when we won Australian Port of the Year, we still only had less than 20 staff. So we still weren't a very big port authority, but we were just starting to build our capability. We also changed chairman. We'd had Peter West as our chairman from 2002 through to 2008, an excellent chairman who really worked to establish the port's reputation, and so that was a great thing for us. We really see that period as establishing our credentials. He seriously looked for who to transfer the role of chairman to, who to suggest to the minister should be a chairman to take the DPA to its next level of expertise and relevance, and he selected Brendan Hammond. 5 years of magnificent growth for us, both in our capability and staffing and competence. But I think, to understand that story, then you have to come back to the culture of the DPA. When I started in 2003 with the Dampier Port Authority, it already had a culture that had established over 15 years. When you're in the regions, you have to get used to working with other people. To get things done, you've got to be aware that the supply chain is slower, certainly back then. You've got to work in with other industry customers. You've got to, as a small team, be ready to respond to emergencies as a small team. You've got to be able to multi-skill. You've got to be able to sort of handle any situation that arises. And I was very pleased to come into an organisation that already had that base culture. And then we've been able to build on that culture every year. We don't have a hierarchy of seniority, that everyone's the same from the CEO down. We're all here just to get the job done. People can get a long way in what they're trying to do without having to seek layers of approval.
The key thing for me was that he provided a blank canvas to draw on, and that's pretty unusual.
He's very supportive of growing people. His motto is, as long as you leave the organisation better than you started.
We take, in his own words, a higher batting line where he says that always think a level higher than where you're thinking. So he tries to tell us that all the time.
We also have a culture where we don't use bad language in the workplace. We hire families when we hire people. We know in a region you can hire the employee, but you've got to also have some sense of the family because, again, culturally that's just who we are and who the region is. In 2008, when we changed chairman and Brendan Hammond came in as our chair, we had our first strategic planning session in the November of that year, and in that planning session it became clear that the next stage of the port's development was really expanding the boundaries. The Dampier Port Authority could actually do things outside of its port. We could start to entertain doing some of the greenfields ports that the government had in mind. In our case, they were the ports of Ashburton near Onslow and the port of Anketel.
Brendan really changed the direction that the organisation was travelling down and opened the thinking, so more of a 50-year outlook.
His biggest contribution was explaining to all of us what intergenerational assets actually mean. What's our footprint today? What's the quality of the footprint we leave behind? And where do we take that footprint ahead? So I think for Brendan to think that in such a huge, holistic manner was it took us a while to understand that whole message which came from him.
The impact was enormous on me. That was when the board decided to open up a Perth office next to all the key decision makers, so like Department of State Development, Landcorp, Chevron, and at that time we also had BHP and Exxon. So I relocated within a month of that strategy session to Perth, where we started this amazing journey.
It was such a monumental moment in our history, but also such a benefit to the state. We had this session in November of 2008. In 2009, State Cabinet actually transferred the Port of Ashburton to our management, and it was the first time that a Port Authority had a port location outside of its port boundaries, an absolute greenfields port.
That's where the journey of the Wheatstone project started for me, which was really part of the Port of Ashburton. So I went to Houston 3 times to talk with their design engineers. Working
with the second largest US company in Chevron, and we just really showed that we could box above our weight. It's great now in 2014 to really see that project just coming out of the ground, and we'll have exports of LNG out of that port in 2017.
One of the big things for me is that we've been able to deliver on the strategy that we sent back in 2009, and it was a strategy that really it was streets ahead of the thinking that was going on. When I arrived down here, it was pretty, what can I say? We didn't have a lot of facilities. We had an office at the time. Now we have nearly 40 people here within 5 years. So it has grown very, very quickly. And that has been because we've been able to get other port areas under our jurisdiction.
Building a port in Ashburton, building a port in Anketel, certainly building a port in Cape Preston East. So there's 4 ports out of 1 which existed when I joined.
And I think that again has typified that 2008 strategy, that a port can add more value to the state if it actually thinks outside of its boundaries, even mentally thinks outside of its boundaries and looks for opportunity. Once we got 2 or 3 years into that process, that we then started to formulate what we now call the ports as gateways concept. It was really the idea that ports are custodians of their port, but to really do their best work, they have to be very knowledgeable and very aware of what's happening outside of their port. One of the principal values of a port is it's an information exchange. We get a lot of information about a lot of projects a lot earlier than a lot of other people. We can look for the synergies in that. It's where the port can sometimes be, coming back to that unique position we have, we can sometimes be the only people that can see the connection. Proponents have been very appreciative of that. I think even in the case of Chevron with its Wheatstone project, I think some of the early visits that some of my team made to Houston saved that project tens of millions of dollars because the port had information that the proponent just didn't have. Also, the port's got an understanding that value is not just about money. It's not about just creating value because it's cheaper to do it. If we do a good job in looking for how we create value, looking for how we can work with customers and the community to get better outcomes in the port, then from that comes private sector investment, and from that comes further trade. The ports also can see that value creation can be that it's been better for the environment, it's been better for heritage, it's been better in terms of efficiency, it's been better in terms of information, education. There's a whole string of value creating elements that can come out of a particular dealing with a project or a customer.
Anchortel's, when it happens, will be the next really big port in the Pilbara. So we engaged early with the Nalama about what might be at Anchortel. We knew there was some significant issues for them in terms of an island called Dixon Island and some of the basalt outcrops in that area. By us working with them to identify where these areas were, we were able to realign things and twist and squeeze things into the area of least impact. And hopefully that will help us having a long and ongoing relationship with the Nalama people of that area, who hopefully will end up, being working or benefiting from the port as it endures into the future.
There's a whole string of value creating elements that can come out of a particular dealing with a project or a customer. The energy that comes from that amongst staff and management and our board in looking at how do we create the maximum value and do it every day. For us, the underlying value of that is we're not wasting money. And wasting money is an intergenerational asset that's just being lost. So we have that side of our business. On the internal side, it's making sure that our systems and processes actually can meet the nimbleness and flexibility that we need. So we've spent some time in going to a thin paperwork strategy where we try and reduce the amount of paperwork we have, and we've been quite successful at that in just taking out processes that we don't need. As much as possible, you can use technologies. We're still building on that.
The live feed they have on the marine traffic is great. You turn around and you see ships coming in and ships going out, and occasionally we have a go at that Steve Lewis and Paul with their parking over the lines, but other than that.
We were keen on getting a GIS group. They've been a huge asset to have, as we've done a lot of work across government on the design of these ports, but they've also managed to collate a lot of the existing information that DPA has.
Through a GIS you can tell a different story by overlapping different pieces of information. All the information in this map here has got tabular information that sits behind it as well, so you can always click on something and that provides us more information. So for example, we can see in that site it's a specific area that's under requirement at the moment.
All that information that once upon a time was just on paper, it makes it instantly accessible, puts your light years ahead.
And the final element of our ports as gateways is that idea generation, and we have what we coin as what would a smart port do. As soon as you say to people, well, what would a smart port do? People have ideas. They go, well, we're here, but a smart port would probably have this. Then you go, well, there's the gap. The Dampier Port Authority has the Dampier Cargo Wharf, but it's a very sought after facility. It's always pretty busy, and therefore some ships have to bypass Dampier, and if they bypass Dampier then they can't get into Port Hedland easily. Sometimes they can, otherwise you've got to go to Fremantle and everything's got to be trucked up. Over half, 52% of the goods coming into the Pilbara come via Melbourne and then actually get trucked across the Nullarbor or trained, reassembled in Welshpool and then sent up by truck to Dampier. A 31-day cycle from China. Paul to St Jackson, our Chief Operating Officer, came up with the concept of having floating decks here where we can actually have floating decks which are very large barges but much more sophisticated than that.
There is no room on this wharf to put anything. It will hopefully solve a lot of the problems here. The ship will be able to do all of the exchange onto the floating deck, and then the ship can sail and the floating deck will be moved in here and the cargo is handled separately.
We had the concept design obviously internally. We then went to market, and Apache was one of the companies that we approached. We explained to them the nature of the concept and the innovation, and we helped them, I think, in identifying and understanding what exactly was on offer, and then they started their own process of understanding it fitted into their core business, and off it went. And in the deal structure that came out of that, the fundamental liability and the requirement for them to develop it was theirs. It's the customers that have been given the opportunity, customers are doing the work, and we have this simple oversight role as a licensor for those projects, and that fits really well with our business model. Started construction August the 9th, substantially will be finished by Christmas Eve. To see that come into fruition in a short period of time has been absolutely fantastic. It's a life-changing experience. But the important thing for me to reflect on is the environment that's enabled me to do that, and the sponsorship of the CEO in particular.
That starts in January, and that's just a game changer. We think that that's going to save between $1 billion and $1.5 billion a year in freight costs to the Pilbara. A great thing for industry up here.
We've certainly recognised early in the discussions that that particular mode of design and operation had a fairly limited environmental impact or footprint. It was interesting to note that not only from a purely locale impact, but the whole mode of logistics, if you like, of that project, vessel transfer times, etc., were also taken into account. So from a greenhouse management point of view, the amount of fuel that a vessel is actually burning to get a product through Dampier could potentially be reduced through this mode of operation.
It's like a wave that's sort of rippling outwards, but there's a certain amount of permeation of the wider industry as to the implications of this.
But it's come out of that whole understanding of value creation, the benefit of being a gateway, and the responsibility and accountability that comes because we are a gateway, and therefore we must do more. And I'm very proud of the fact that the Dampier Port Authority, we see that, we get it, and we do it.
We're all celebrating the Ashes, are we?
25 years on now, and celebrating our 25 years, I think Dampier can feel very comfortable and confident that we are a leading port. Most ports in the world are landlord ports, and at a base level, Dampier is a landlord port. A landlord port means that we have land and we rent it out to tenants, we have infrastructure and we rent it out to vessels when they come in. We're a landlord port. What Dampier's done is build on that and join some of the international significant ports like Rotterdam and Antwerp, some of the ports in Canada and America, who actually see that ports can do more than just be landlord ports. If all we do is extract rents, then we're not really doing our role. And I think Dampier gets that.
Okay.
The legacy we'd like to leave is that some of the DNA, some of the things that are actually innate to Dampier in terms of how we do things, actually pervade to other organisations. It's also heartening to know that this year alone we had the highest rate of return of any port in Australia. We have had records in all categories. We have record tonnage for Dampier, we've got record vessel arrivals. In other words, trade is still going well, and yet we're thinking differently.
The main thing is try to make sure we cause zero harm in the efforts of trying to make these goals achievable for us.
It's not just about leaving legacy infrastructure that's useful, but I think there's a corollary aspect which is about not leaving a mess, trying to make things better for the community now and into the future. That's that good way of doing things.
I think that's a great legacy for Dampier too, is that we are seen and recognised as part of the community, as a contributor to the community, and somebody that's actually always got the Pilbara at heart. One thing we all have to recognise is that the Pilbara is abound with opportunities. It will continue. Some of the best years of the Pilbara are still ahead of it, and therefore its ports need to be able to respond to that future. It'll be the engine room for Australia's economy for many, many decades.
The potential and the projects that we're working on is just phenomenal. Normally we work on one project like Wheatstone every 10 years, but we've had enormous expansion. We've had Gorgon, we've had Pluto, Wheatstone, expansion with FMG up at Port Hedland. The list goes on. Ankertel, Cape Preston East, Cape Preston. So the Pilbara really is the place that is changing, certainly Western Australia, but also Australia in terms of the economy and future.
People like Peter West and Brendan Hammond as our chairs, they're people that have been able to keep that momentum going, and that's been fantastic.
Very good challenge, exceedingly good challenge.
I have just arrived from overseas, and my first job 7 years ago I got it and still have it. I still enjoy it, so it's very good. I like the environment, the opportunities.
It's no effort to get help from anyone for anything, whether it's from the CEO or wharfies, anyone. And I include all the wharfies in all that sort of business as well. The truckies, the whole lot. Yeah, they just gel.
It's a great place to work. It's innovative. It makes you step outside the box and think outside the square. It makes you want to do better. It's just fabulous, not only for the people, but just the whole environment. It's the best view in Dampier.